Look here, please. Good. Nice. Very nice. One more, please. One more. This looks great. One more. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Try again, and we'll definitely get together.
Thank you.
Put your one in the line. Okay.
Okay.
Meeting with
Hello. Hi. A great event. So you are attending to interview to this afternoon or tomorrow? I think it's tomorrow. I mean, Saturday, not today. Oh, no, tomorrow afternoon. Okay, thank you.
My name is Femi Oke. I am your co-moderator for the first part of this morning. It is a great honour to be here at the International Peace Institute, and also to introduce the president of the IPI, Mr. Terje Rod Larsen. Good morning.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and dear friends, a warm welcome to you all, and good morning. I'm a little bit sad this morning because Miro is leaving us, and I think I would like to say, Miro, that I served for more than 20 years in the UN, and I think you've been the best president of the General Assembly for all those years which I served at the UN. So we give him a hand. So good morning again, and it is indeed a pleasure to welcome you to IPI and today's event on broader perspectives on the UN of today and tomorrow. The event is organized in partnership with the Office of the President of the General Assembly. I also have the pleasure, once again, to welcome back to IPI the President of the 72nd session of the General Assembly, Miro, who will be giving opening remarks. We are also honored this morning to have with us members from the team of external advisors to the President of the General Assembly. The advisors provided counsel to the President on how best to advance his priorities during the 72nd session. Those priorities included sustaining peace, the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, climate change, migration, human rights, and not the least, UN reform. We look forward to hearing the conclusions of the advisors following their deliberations with the PJ throughout his term. These conclusions were summarized in a final report that makes the case for why multilateralism matters today, as well as providing evidence for the importance of the centrality of prevention. It also provides ideas for global responses to common challenges, including strengthening the role of the General Assembly and reaffirming the principles of the Charter. The report highlights the need to build upon and invest in the success of the multilateral system and what it has achieved with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Agreement on Climate Change. There was much work done throughout the PJ's term to identify ways to realize the goals of these historical commitments, including by engaging the private sector and civil society in new and creative ways. IPI has worked together with the Office of the PJ on many issues, including peace building and sustaining peace, which the President identified as the key priorities for the 72nd session. We partnered with the Office of the PJ to organize a multi-stakeholder retreat on sustaining peace ahead of the high-level meeting on peace building and sustaining peace that was convened in April this year. In order to help to realize the goal of sustaining peace, the advisors in their report emphasized the necessity to have a better understanding of not only the root causes of conflict, but also, if I may say so, the root causes of peace, something we study and promote here at IPI. We are looking forward to what I do believe will be an enriching discussion today on how to sustain peace amidst the ongoing challenges facing multilateralism, as well as the future of the United Nations. And we are very fortunate to have with us today the internationally acclaimed journalist Femi UNGA to moderate the first session, the future of the rule-based system, multilateralism under threat. The second session, a stronger General Assembly for a stronger United Nations, will be moderated by one of the members of the team of external advisor, namely the British journalist and author Nick Gowing. And it is now my pleasure and my honor to invite Miro, the President of the 72nd session of the General Assembly, to deliver his opening remarks. Miro, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Terry, for your nice introduction, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for being with us this morning. When I was elected President of the United Nations General Assembly, I knew right from the beginning that I would like to form a team of external advisors, because these are the people who can bring a new perspective, a different perspective on the issues we are dealing with. And of course, they also represent some sort of reality check on how are we doing and what we should be doing better. And I was pleased and honored that this team of accomplished personalities who know everything about the world of politics, international relations, and also the United Nations accepted to help me with this task. And we had 4 formal meetings during this session. We were in touch during the year, of course, via emails, phone calls, and together with my team, we also thought that once we are all here in New York, it would also be interesting and good to offer their wisdom and to share their views on current issues with the wider audience. And I want to thank Terje and his team at IPI for hosting this event, which I'm sure will be very interesting. I should also like to say that I'm very sorry that only one woman who is member of my team, Her Excellency Amina Mohammed, was able to make it to New York today. So the panels are not as balanced when it comes to gender as I would wish to see. And you know that these issues are very important, but please don't judge us by the composition of the panels. It's simply the fact that the other ladies could not make it to us, so I hope you accept this. Now to the theme of our first panel, the future of a rules-based system, multilateralism under threat. Here we had a discussion again with my team whether or not there should be a question mark at the end of the theme. But unfortunately, we concluded that there is no room for question mark, because there is no longer a question whether multilateralism is under threat. It's a sad reality, and we cannot deny it. Multilateralism is indeed under fire. I believe that when the United Nations was created in 1945, it was based around 3 main ideals. First, inclusion. That means to get rid of the caveats and restrictions of the League of Nations, and that's why we have now 193 member states of the General Assembly of the United Nations. Second, to create a system which is based on rules, and rules that would apply to everyone, no matter their size or influence. And thirdly, a system that is based on compromise and cooperation, which means that the idea was that instead of pursuing own agendas, which had, by the way, led us to 2 world wars, we could compromise and cooperate for common goals. But now, as we can see, these principles no longer seem to be universally accepted and cherished. We are seeing trends that go in the opposite direction. We see a return to bilateralism and exclusive clubs. We see an erosion of the rules-based system, and we also see that there is a failure to see that although multilateralism does require compromise, this compromise also means that we all win, while the me-first policy can in fact put us all in danger. So that's why there is no question mark on the theme of this first panel, multilateralism is under threat. I can also recall the words of the German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas, who spoke to the German Ambassadors Conference lately, and he was again drawing from a book by well-known American academic Robert Kagan that he described today's world as a free interplay of powers with changing alliances in which the strongest dictate the rules. And Heiko Maas said, and I agree with him, that we must resist this to the best of our ability. So I would like to wish this first panel to help us to find answers how to do it, what shall we do differently, what action is needed. We definitely need to think outside of the box, we need to engage, and we also need to be seeking for answers to the questions whether and how the United Nations can lead us in resisting these current trends. Do we have a proper leadership in democratic part of the world? How does the United Nations fit in with other multilateral organizations, such as, for example, World Economic Forum? And finally, are we talking enough about these issues and in the right way? So these are the questions that I would like to put to our panelists, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussion that is expected. Thank you very much.
Thank you, PJ. You did my moderating for me. I made very fast notes. So, what kind of caliber of person could possibly make it to be an advisor to the President of the General Assembly? Her Excellency Susana Marcora has been an advisor to the President of Argentina, a former Foreign Minister of Argentina, and a former Chef de Cabinet of the UN Secretary General. She joins us this morning via video. Take a look.
Thanks to IPI and to PGA LabJack for allowing me to convey this message through a video, since I cannot make it to New York due to a conflicting commitment. You are going to be discussing the conclusions of the work of this group of external advisors called by PGA LabJack to support him during this year. You have seen for sure the document, and you will have the opportunity to dwell into more details through the friends and colleagues that are present there. I want to emphasize only two aspects. First, this was a creative, personal initiative by PGA LabJack to call on a group of people who know the UN, who care about the UN, who understand the intrinsicies of the UN, to support him as a sounding board and to provide different perspectives on issues that he felt were important to put before us. This was very important, and I believe it was an enriching experience for all of us, and hopefully it also enriched the views of PGA. But secondly, I think that this, which was a personal initiative, should be considered under a different light. We should think about how to institutionalize such an initiative so that PGAs that take on board a one-year responsibility, which is broad, is difficult, that has issues of a very, very different nature, can resort to a group of people who, as I said, not only care, but do not have a vested interest to promote an issue in a certain direction. My sense is that there is value to think about this idea. There is value to consider the experience of this year, and that's what you're going to be doing today. So I look forward to seeing the conclusions of your deliberations. I wish you an excellent deliberation. I want to thank again IPI for this opportunity, and finally, and most importantly, I want to thank PGA LabJack for offering me the chance to participate. Thank you all the best.
Thank you very much.
Good morning to
It's good to have you on the panel. Jean-Marie Ganeno is also an advisor please take a seat. Thank you. Yes, very good. Please join us. And I ask Jean-Marie. Thank you. Why are you on this panel of advisors? And he said, I am the longest serving peacekeeper, head of peacekeeping, and I managed a ship and stopped it from sinking. It's the kind of advisor that everybody should have. Welcome. Jeffrey Sachs, please join us on stage. Thank you. When I asked Jeffrey Sachs, why did the PGA pick you? He said, I have no idea, but I'm very glad that he did. Morning, Jeffrey. And Nick Gowing, hello. Former BBC journalist, and he gave the PGA some time ago a paper that he was writing called Thinking the Unthinkable. The content of that paper was so intriguing that the PGA and Nick Gowing then worked together on that, and this is where he ended up. He was an advisor. There's more to that story. Nick will tell us a little bit more. But good morning, gentlemen. Good to have you. So the microphone in front of you, if you push, it is now live. I'm just curious as to when you were working together, before you do your opening remarks, were you having a positive conversation about the future of multilateralism, or was it a very depressing one, Francisco?
Depressing, you want?
Yes, was it an optimistic, what's the possibilities, or was it a depressing?
They were realistic, and if you want to be realistic, you cannot be too optimistic nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
But always with the purpose of building paths to find solutions. Anyway, you have to be realistic and to reckon that the problems are very big and very difficult to solve.
Sure. Jean-Marie, where were you on that optimism level? Was it half full or half empty?
Me?
Jean-Marie.
Well, I think there's a sense of urgency that time is the clock is ticking, and we don't have many years to react and turn the tide. I think there is a recognition that the tide is not going in the right direction, but there's also a recognition that human beings have agency, and that if we just sit there, of course, it may continue to get worse, but this report, and I think all our work, is a call to action, that something can be done about it. For me, that was the spirit of the conversation.
Sure. Jeff?
Well, each round of dinner became more and more depressing. And if we had had one more round, we would have just sat there sobbing, I think, rather than eating. I think the situation is very dangerous. The United States is out of control, literally, and is absolutely antagonistic to the institution that it did the most to create. And we have to all, since there are other 192 countries and 95.6% of the world's population, have to adjust to this reality and try to both continue to solve problems and to hope that the United States returns to political sanity. This is really the big issue.
Nick, just as a quick starter offer, not your opening remarks, but just in terms of positivity, where are you? Future multilateralism.
I'm quite negative, but just to pick up Jeff's point, there wasn't any sobbing. It wasn't like that. It was very realistic. But remember, this started 11 months ago, and look how much more somber and sinister things have gone in the last 11 months. So while we were pragmatic with good expectations, not high expectations of where things might go, reality has taken over in a way which probably many of us were thinking. And you can say pessimism and optimism. No, this was about realism. And I think one of the reasons I accepted the invitation from the President is this. That it seemed to me that within institutions there's a danger of institutions perpetuating their own way of thinking. And that's why we're doing this project on thinking the unthinkable. You've got to think in a different way, because much of what is happening is simply not on the agenda. There's conformity, which is driving a certain traditionality and approaching issues which are now going backwards. And therefore, I was delighted to do this because it was very, not sobbing, it was sobering. And it became more sinister. And it's a pity in many ways that we're having to no longer continue in this role, because actually we've got a benchmark, we've got a ground line from which we can make more judgments and hopefully be taken seriously. This is about engaging, and I'm amazed that so many people have turned up at this time on a Monday morning to actually talk about this. But this is something that people are talking about behind the scenes but don't really want to talk about publicly. And I think we've now got to the point where it needs to be addressed publicly, and it needs to be addressed in a sobering way, not in a sobbing way.
Jean-Marie, let's start with your opening remarks.
Thank you. Well, I'll start. I'll make
Jean-Marie, there's a little, push that little, there you go.
I'll make 7 points. When I am told the world was made in 7 days, and so to talk about the future materialism in 7 points probably is about right. And my first point will be a blunt one. Not to follow the fashion of the more and more violent language that we hear both in international relations and domestic relations, but because I think actually part of that violence in language is a reflection of the gap between the public, a nice soft public discourse, and the reality, a harsh reality. So better be blunt. And so my first point is really that international organization, they were not created, they are usually not created to save the world. They are created to further the interest of the dominant power of the day. That is the reality, and that was the reality in 1945. What was exceptional then, however, was a sense that the dominant power of the day in the United States has a vision that could accommodate many countries around the world, and that there was a certain sincerity in the way the whole thing happened. And that's why there was acceptance of a project that was inspired by the United States. And that brings me to my second point. What happens when that power that inspired the whole construction doesn't believe anymore that the United Nations serves its interests, and is at the same time losing some of its dominance, not its military dominance, but its dominance in many areas. The first point, not believing in the UN, that has happened before in the history of the UN. When you think of the Nixon years, it was a pretty rough moment for the UN. The change of the guard, the fact that the world, the balance of the world is changing, that's something fundamentally new. And that brings me to my third point, which is that in a way the result of that is a fundamental ideological crisis of the world. A crisis in the goals that we pursue. Think of all the concepts that emerged in the post-Cold War uni-moment of responsibility to protect, international justice, all these issues. Today they are somewhat contested. And to be specific, R2P, what does it mean when you have a country like Syria where 500,000 people are dead? So we see the gap between lofty rhetoric and the reality of our world. What does mean justice when you see war crimes committed in a variety of countries? So that gap is profound. And you see also the gap in the rhetoric about globalization. We have been told that globalization is a wonderful thing, and it has been in some ways a wonderful thing. More people have been lifted out of poverty in the last 20 years than in the whole history of humanity. Now we are down to, and it's a huge number, but compared to what it was some years ago, 700 million very poor people, that's 700 million too many, but that's much less than in the past. So there is something good of globalization. But at the same time, for many people who see their income stagnating, they think that they are being taken for a ride. And so there is a profound distrust rising of political leaders. And so what do we do? And that's my fourth point. I think we should not give up. We should not give up because the alternative
frankly, in an age of nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, biological weapons, the alternative to a world managed on the basis of cooperation and negotiation is just catastrophic. It's in the end of climate change. In the end, it would spell the end of the planet Earth as we know it. So the alternative is catastrophic. And I would say there are reasons for hope, because the world today is a complex and connected affair. And that complexity makes it difficult to solve problems, but it also creates opportunities. And the connectivity is more visible today. So the case for cooperative policies can be made in a stronger fashion. So my last 3 points. What do we do then? I think the first point, my 5th point, is you build alliances. You build alliances of countries. And that's not so easy. You have to build alliances, I would say, with second-tier countries. If you're a dog, you don't necessarily think that you need a multilateral organization. I think you're wrong, but you can have that illusion. If you're in the 2nd or 3rd tier, you see the benefits of a rule-based order. And so there are many countries around the world who want that, but they have to be brought together. And I think it's a top priority for the present Secretary General. Second point, second element of a strategy, you open up to new actors, because the world today is not just a world of states. It's a world of corporations, it's a world of non-governmental organizations. There are a multiplicity of actors that have agency. And so that's a challenge for the UN, because the UN is an organization of states. But the challenge, the UN must more and more think beyond its natural clients, the states. And the third point, maybe partly tactics, partly substance. Doug Marshall once said, "I'm no secular pope." I think in today's world, with the polarization of language, it's very hard for a Secretary General to play the role of a secular pope. Let's say the way Kofi Annan could do. And so I think the role of the Secretary General in behind the scenes, pushing issues, addressing conflicts, sometimes not the first order conflict always, but second order conflict, that's an enormous contribution to humanity. I saw it in peacekeeping myself. You don't turn countries into something, countries afflicted by conflict into something magnificent. But when you have avoided catastrophic outcomes, it's already something, and it's something very important. It's millions of lives that can be saved. And I think today the UN has to look for the long term and focus on that difficult, persistent task that will give hope to people. And I'll stop there.
I see people in the audience making notes, and I see Nick taking photographs. Nick, are you tweeting right now?
Not yet. Not yet, but no, not yet.
Okay. But there will be tweeting to come.
I'm still struck by the number of people who've come to talk about this kind of thing. That's important. Sorry.
I know, gentlemen, you're thinking about your own remarks coming up, but what Jean-Marie said, did it resonate with you? Jeff?
Yeah, very much. I think the stakes are very high. I would say that we're in 3 major transitions globally. One is the geopolitical transition. The United States is definitely not lost its nerve, but lost its power relatively, and that is where a lot of the neurotic state of affairs of the United States comes in, which is a self-image of a dominant country that is no longer so dominant. And this is one very dangerous phase. Second is we're in a technology transition that is profound. I think no one doubts how rapidly all social systems and economic sectors are being transformed by the digital revolution. and it's still not clear how it works, how it affects us, how it's going to be governed, what it means for politics, economy, daily life. And the third is the environmental transition, which is potentially catastrophic. We are at the very end of climate safety. We've already left the boundaries of the climate we knew during the era of civilization, the so-called Holocene period. We are potentially in runaway environmental disaster now. And all of these are profoundly important reasons for a rule-based system and cooperation. All of these are challenges that are global scale, that transcend the national order, that are complex, that will create rapid changes of power and rapid vulnerabilities. And this is why a rule-based system is so important. It's a system of justice and a system of principle. It takes the commitment of its members and of the global population to understand this. In the United States, we still have a consensus, I would say, among the broad American public in the value of rules and in the value of the United Nations. But we do not have it in Washington, and we certainly don't have it in the White House. We're in the hands of a psychopath, clinically speaking. We're in a very difficult, dangerous situation that I would not underestimate. Our political system is at profound risk in this country, and a lot of the security apparatus has been geared towards U.S. primacy for so long that the idea that we're in a battle with China is not foreign to the thinking in Washington. It is insane, potentially catastrophic, but it is not far from the thinking in Washington. The power politics, therefore, envelops us, and it overwhelms even our survival. We have a dominance of resistance to even basic steps to save ourselves from climate disaster. And by the way, not just in the United States, in every fossil fuel economy. It shows how profoundly corrupt politics is everywhere. Money dominates. The one who got this closest to being right, of course, was Karl Marx in his Political Economy. Politics are rotten in the United States, in Canada, in Australia, in Brazil, in other fossil fuel rich countries. And this is a resistance against human survival, actually. So all of this is to say that the stakes are extremely high. I do not believe they're going to be won quietly, unfortunately. I think we need, we're in a brawl, and the brawl is going to get worse. Maybe Mr. Trump will go, and that will be at least a short-term salvation for the U.S. If he stays long, our democracy itself is at grave risk. But no matter how it plays, these transitions are so shocking that the idea of staying to rules and staying to shared principles and staying to justice is very, very hard. And I'll just say, in war crimes, when a president of the United States is brought before the ICC, then I'll believe we have global justice. Why don't we start with George W. Bush for the Iraq War, for example, or all of the CIA operations around the world? We cannot have a rule-based system unless we're able to call out those in power. That's the idea of a rule-based system. It's extremely hard, it's extremely fragile, and we're basically hanging by a thread right now, in my view.
Thanks, Jeff. I just listening to you, I'm just thinking here, we're at the International Peace Institute, we're talking about the United Nations. As somebody who is not American, I feel the UN is more than America, and multilateralism is more than America, and the world is waking up to that. Francisco, please.
Yes, I'd like to underline what Jeffrey just said, that there is at least a vacuum created by the American new situation, that if we still believe and want a rule-based order, this has to be fulfilled, taking also into consideration that China is a growing power, not only in Asia, but in Africa, in Latin America, in Europe, very clearly. And that so-called BRICS exist and are there to stay. But we cannot speak about all these things without considering the reality of the world as it is now. Many things have changed in the last year, as you said, but many things have changed in the last decades at least. And if we want multilateralism, we also must consider that it's not, there are several ways, so exceptions in what concerns multilateral. Not only the United Nations, the European Union is of multilateral. The British Commonwealth is also a way of making effective multilateral. So we cannot confine the discussion of multilateralism to the United Nations. The United Nations are undoubtedly an important institution. They have lost part of their prestige and of their influence. I am very happy to have been in this group of advisors to the President, and I want to say publicly that I appreciated very much what you did for the United Nations, but for all of us during your mandate, especially underlining the migration cycle. But it's not enough, and we know it's not enough. And besides that, we have not only other modalities of multilateralism, but also to consider that, for instance, globalization is there to stay, and irrespectively of the ups and downs of multilateralism, it exists, and it has achieved some ways of communication and of joining and sharing at world scale in telecommunications, in the internet, which as it does, whatever, which in my opinion are very important and are ways of globalizing our existence and our understanding of the others. Of course, on the other hand, there are negative aspects of globalization. Hackers, for instance, may be included in that category. But we must not forget this phenomenon and the existence of that, and concentrate ourselves only in the United Nations as if it was the only magical solution. In my opinion, it is not, and it's less than it has always been. And it's particularly needed in a world where now, as you underlined very well, there are new ways of existing and of creating conflict. Nationalisms are appearing again. Populism is a reality. Not to mention other realities like fake news, for instance, and the way they are used from one side of the world to the other, and with clear political domination purposes. So, when you look at the United Nations and you think about the reforms proposed by the Secretary General, which are not very daring reforms, but which are important reforms, and the way they have been dealt with, the slowness, the downgrading to a certain extent they have been submitted to. It's difficult to believe that it's through the United Nations that we will practice the rule of law, that we will go on defending the virtues of multilateralism.
So what I hear is the United Nations may not be relevant anymore. Francisco? Be relevant anymore.
They are relevant, especially because they allow at the General Assembly precisely that is very small and what to say at the same level, theoretically of course, we are all equal, some are not equal themselves. Theoretically at least, the small country have the same rights and the same possibilities at the General Assembly to express itself and to vote. But then you have, I think we are going to discuss that in the second part, the Security Council, the veto powers and all that.
Let me bring in Jeff. Jeff, go ahead.
I was just wanting to react to the word relevant. It can mean two things. The UN is more important than ever. The idea of solving major problems like climate change are urgent and cannot be done other than through the United Nations. So relevant in the sense of important, I think the UN only grows in importance. More interconnectedness, more terrifying problems, more potential to do good. If by relevant you mean its power and ability, that's different. That's not exactly, you could call it relevant, but the United Nations is weak when the major powers play on their own rules, when the United States, and I'm going to continue to insist on the special danger of the United States because it is a special danger. When the United States believes it can launch wars irrespective of the UN Security Council, then the world's very dangerous and the UN is not relevant in that sense. But relevance we should take from the normative point of view. Do we need the United Nations or did it outlive its usefulness? I would say the UN as a concept, as a set of principles, as a set of interconnected treaty relations is more relevant than ever in its history.
Nick?
Thank you. You might wonder why I'm sitting here as someone who will be known to many of you as a former BBC presenter. But I left by choice 4 years ago, and it was at a time when things were happening in eastern Ukraine, and then also Crimea was seized by Russia. And I worked on the basis that something big was going on. And I think what's interesting here for you is the fact that what started 2 or 3 years ago as a kind of a sense that something big was taking place, a level of disruption, is now becoming more center stage, but it isn't quite there. And you said I would give a little more detail about why I'm sitting here, because when the president, and he still is the foreign minister of Slovakia, I sent him a copy of our first draft of a document that I and my colleague Chris Langdon were preparing about why leaders couldn't think the unthinkable. When we came up with an enormous amount of interviewing, more than 500 very senior people giving an enormous amount of time talking privately to us, saying they are fearful, they are overwhelmed, and they are scared by what is happening. We published that, and people wondered if we'd been smoking something, because no one believed that it was that bad. In fact, one publisher refused to publish it. They then did. And I had an email from the foreign minister saying, you're right on target. So if you like, what you're seeing here is on the platform those who are deeply concerned and are hopefully seeing ahead of where many others are at the moment. I guess I'm really here to launch a grenade, and that's what I think I managed to do on the few occasions that we met, because there are significant conformities out there. And what I would suggest to you, and I have no allegiance to anyone now, so I can say this, that it's all very well talking about systems like migration, like financing for development in that building across the road, and in many government institutions as well. The trouble is the world is moving much faster. And what we set out to do is work out the human side of, can leaders cope with this? And what we've uncovered is deeply distressing, not depressing, distressing. Our main finding is the following, which really underpins the kind of message that many of you can go away with. This has been peer reviewed based on the data. We've been through thousands of pages of our transcripts. The conformity which gets you to the top in many ways now disqualifies you from understanding the enormity of disruption that's underway and the implications of how to handle it. Because I put to you, and I don't want to sound offensive to anyone in the room, but the trouble is the way many at your level have got to the top is by conforming. The trouble is the way the world is going now is moving in such a different way for reasons you all know. And I don't have to mention the US president or Brexit. I can mention Hungary. Look at what's happened in Sweden. Look at what's happening in Italy. It's not what we call populism. We call it pushbackism. It's pushback against systems. And my thought to you, which certainly we debated vigorously, is how well those who are elected or nominated by governments and the public are able to handle the enormity of what is happening. The UN is relevant if somehow it can show its relevance. And that means that there's got to be a connection between those across the road and those who serve it on behalf of governments and the feelings out there, because not just because of social media, what you're seeing is a pushback against those who don't deliver in the views of those, the majority now in many countries, who feel they've been let down. And that in its own way is critical to understanding the future and the sanctity of governance. Now this may sound all a bit rich and so on, but that's what people at the top are telling us. But they don't know quite yet how to change the system. So we've got so far here on the 10th of September, but there's much more to do to embolden and enable. And when I heard Terje Rood-Larsen mention Robert Kagan, he's just bringing out a book called The Jungle Grows Back. And the assumption at the moment of so many people is that actually life is going to keep getting better. Everything is going to be good, and of course economies are in pretty good shape at the moment. There's full employment in many countries, both here and in many countries in Europe, but that's not guaranteed for the reasons that Jeff has put on the agenda with AI and algorithms and the end of work as we know it. The end of it in a way which is far faster than anyone might assume. The jungle growing back. You've got Francis Fukuyama saying there's a new kind of democracy. There's a democracy which is now voting for very different kinds of leaders. And my concern is that those across the road and those nominated to serve across the road, in the end are working within an old framework, that conformity. And the conformity may have been appropriate when organizations have developed, but the world is now moving so, if I may put it, damn fast, that the systems are way behind the ability to cope with it. And that's been very much at the root of our findings. And in many ways, you haven't seen anything yet. So when I was approached by Mr. Lychak to do this, I could see this as an opportunity, frankly, to do this kind of thing, which is to open it up, because there are many out there who are deeply concerned, and part of the next problem is the next generation. This is afflicting the corporate world as well, about purpose and about values, and I'm summarizing here, obviously. But the next generation don't like a lot of what the corporate world is doing and producing, not just because it's 10 years since the financial crisis. It's about the validity and the credibility of much that is being done. And what you're seeing is a pushback from the next generation who don't want to become public servants, who don't want to join partnerships as they used to, who have got a very different value set, and all of you know this. But this has enormous implications for power and how power is exacted in this kind of environment. So my final thought is the tension there between wanting a multilateral risk-based system that can handle all of this in the way that we were asked to consider, and the fact that leaders can't actually handle it anymore. And the tension is what's expected of the UN on so many issues when the reality of the world is moving fast in other directions. So it's a very uncomfortable tension, but the main thing at the moment is to recognize that there is this new normal, and there's going to have to be a way around it which is different to the way it is at the moment.
The way many of you got here is by conforming. This is a good point for me to tell you that there was a Q&A. So if you have some pushback for our advisors back here, or you want to take them up on some of the comments that they've been making, we will be doing that in about 10 minutes time. We'll have microphones and they'll be able to come to you, so the conversation goes not just from here, but back and forth. Let's start with doing things differently and be specific. Jean-Marie.
Well, I think what Nick is describing is the crisis of politics. After 1989, this was a triumph of the individual, in the sense that the world could be changed one person at a time. In every society, it's a balance between the collective and the individual. And the balance was tipped massively in favor of the individual. It was bad taste to talk about class interest, about collective interest. You've seen the demise of traditional political parties. You've seen the demise of unions. I think that what we see now, what Nick calls pushbackism, I think it's a backlash of people who do understand that they are not just individuals. That if they are individuals, they are screwed, forgive my language. That there are relations of power, that there are individuals who are more powerful than others. If they don't organize, they're weak. And so what we are going to see now is, unless there is a better way of organizing collective interest, I think we're going to see more and more of the so-called populist way. That's what's happening.
Can you think of a better way, or you just think that there should be a better way?
I think there is a better way, and the better way is to recognize, for instance, everybody recognizes today that inequality is a massive issue. That progress is benefiting the happy few, the 1% or the 0.1%, while the mass of people are not benefiting from it. So when you look in practical terms at what has happened, you've seen a steady weakening of unions, of the bargaining power of masses of people. You see the impact of globalization, that indeed unskilled labor is under continuous pressure. This has to be admitted. This has to be addressed in very concrete terms. If it is not, you're going to have more of the same deterioration of politics. And so I think it all starts with recognizing that this world as it is has political implications that are unfavorable to millions and millions of people. And if you don't recognize that, then you're talking in a world that doesn't connect to the vast majority of people.
I was at a leadership conference behind closed doors with a lot of very senior people in Cambridge on Saturday and Friday. And what you're beginning to see, and this is the fascinating thing, those that have been in government and those who've been in major corporate structures, who've left, who've retired or been kicked out, they are amazingly frank about the shortcomings. Those still in positions of power and responsibility are still struggling in the corporate sector with shareholders, with regulators, and everything that they have to do to keep themselves on the right side of legality and also accountability. And in politics as well, the discipline within the party structures means that people, by and large, certainly as we're seeing in the United Kingdom at the moment, have to remain loyal to a certain way of doing things. But there was a very senior politician, it was behind closed doors, so I can't actually say who it was, because I haven't got his agreement. The political system is now in an advanced state of decay. There is a crisis in the way we do politics. We do not have to be part of a museum to be part of the process. And so what I think we're doing is we're now we're logging into a time of potentially very significant change. But in answer to your question, I have to say that based on our work, and it's been peer reviewed, the data has been coded and everything, it's our data, but it's been done by other people and also one of our researchers, makes it very clear that those who are leaders at the moment are going to struggle to handle the enormity of what's happening because of the nature of the way in which they've got there. And I've said that already once, but it is significant because we've detected in a number of brainstormings we've done, those below them are getting frustrated and saying, you've got to do things in a different way, and they can't do it.
Francisco, what did you just write down on your note paper? Yes, press your microphone, share it. No secret writings.
You are very good journalist. Asking the right question. I just wanted to underline that you speak about democracy, but democracy only exists really in half of the world. So there are many, many countries where you cannot say that the individual rights that characterize democracy, freedom of expression, freedom of information, possibility of creating political parties, etc., exist. So sometimes we put everything in the same basket, and it should not be done. Then I was writing that there are new globalitarian powers which are not political powers, are economic and financial powers that govern the law. You know, govern regions, they govern the law, they negotiate with the political power. They are not elected, of course. And these realities exist nowadays. We cannot just say, let's put that apart, it's a different problem. It's the problem, in my opinion. And then I think that there's a trend to glorify meritocracy and to criticize democracy. I think it's a very dangerous trend, but that democracy to survive and to be more active. Somebody quoted Fukuyama, that Fukuyama was very wrong in his essential and first prediction, as you know. Democracy to be alive, to be strong, to justify itself, has to fight against populisms, against the new nationalism that have been mentioned already here very well. And I don't think that we can isolate all these problems as if they were different problems and each had a solution, because they are all, everything is in the same basket, although most of these problems have to be separated. And finally, I'd like to underline that what we call it this in Portugal, the civil society has a bigger role to play. By civil society, I mean institutions privately created, like associations to help people who are ill or who are old, like the Red Cross, if you want, at the international basis, that are independent from the governments and that have a very important role to play if we want to stabilize something close to democracy and not something based in meritocracy with all the dangers that meritocracy has of the exercise of freedom. As I lived in a country where we had a very long dictatorship and I fought against it, for me this part of the preserving freedom is and will be very important. So maybe I'm exaggerating and people are not considering freedom anymore as important. But really, for me, people cannot be themselves, cannot exercise their own rights if freedom does not exist.
So remember, I asked you about how do you do things differently and be specific. Jean-Marie, what did you want to add? Go ahead.
Well, I think democracy has been reduced to a process, a way of allocating power. You have a majority of votes, you are in power. And of course, there's a good side to that, is that when you are unhappy with your leaders, you can kick them out. But this is not democracy. This is just a small part of it. The question of what is a good life? What is a good government? What are the values that should drive us? That is conveniently put aside. Now you have the nationalist parties, you have a whole set of now political movements that are on the rise because precisely they address the question of values. We disagree with their values, but they fight on the terrain of values. And on the other side, there's only the words democracy, rule of law. Rule of law for what? Rule of law, what kind of law? A law that protects the people, a law that promotes justice, or just law for the sake of law? I think that's where there is something terrible missing. There's a sense that we are fighting what is a surge of values with the technocratic defense of a technical process. That is a losing battle. if you don't fight on the terrain of values, you're going to lose. And I think now that's in a way the big challenge of leadership today is to fight for values. That is what's missing in my view.
Jeff, I also want you to take us forward and talk about action, because you're so clear on what the problem is. I'm really curious about action, but I know you want to say something first, and I also want to dispatch the microphones. So stand up if you have a microphone. Stand up, make yourself known. Don't be shy. Right, and there's one at the back. Stand up, microphone at the back. Okay, walk down the aisle. People will put their hands up. Who'll be very eager to speak. Keep your hands up until a microphone is standing by you. Okay, one there. Okay, please walk. There you go, very good. There you go. Don't speak yet if you have a microphone. And there's another microphone. Turn around, turn around. There you go, gentleman at the back. He wants to speak, very good. All right, microphone holders, don't talk yet. Jeff, action.
I want to speak in favor of technocracy and expertise, and actually disagree somewhat with what's been said. Our problems are complex. We are not solving any of them now. Take a problem like the energy transformation, which was agreed in the Paris Climate Agreement. This is to a very significant extent a technical problem first, not only because there are important vested interests. This is not a values problem. This is a problem of how renewable energy works, how it's distributed, what it costs, where it can be mobilized, when battery-operated vehicles will be available. Our politicians, of course, almost by definition, are ignorant of this and are representing interests, especially powerful interests. We don't have a serious study in the United States on this topic, despite 25 years of debate. Serious study by the US government, I should say, because the US government is not about serious understanding of this issue, serious analysis of options. It's because it represents various factions, various corporations, various interests. Our problems will not be solved by the mobilization of coalitions or even values, which I believe in also as being important. They will be solved by deeper understanding of the crises, the opportunities, and the challenges. Our governments are badly organized. Our UN processes are very weak because though they're perhaps better than some alternatives, they are not substantive and deep. One of the reasons is because the powers here, which starts with the United States and the other big powers, don't want deep analysis that shows how to actually do things. They want their power. So I do want to say that I think our biggest problem is that we aspire to a very, very high level of living. And if you want to understand how the world lives at a high level, it depends on highly complex systems. And those highly complex systems need management and, of course, democratic oversight. But they need expertise. We have banished the expertise. We don't even, in our country, in my country, we don't have legislative hearings anymore because these idiots, they're not idiots, these corrupt representatives are more interested in their campaign contributions and in getting their legislation passed than they are in studying any particular issue with any consistency. So we are governed by, I don't know, I won't say we're governed by idiots, we're governed by idiocy, by foolishness, by recklessness, by a lack of the most basic scientific, technological, economic and financial awareness, and the system is built that way right now. So I'm not impressed with this being only a fight of values. This is a fight over substance. And the people who know are nowhere close. All the scientists are being thrown out of the US government. Ask yourself why.
Jean-Marie, I know you want to respond. If you have a microphone, stand up, please.
But on the very point that Jeff just raised, I want to show where expertise meets politics. When we discuss the different options to manage transformation in energy, you have to see at what rate you're going to discount the future. Because depending on that rate, you have different choices. And that is not a technical issue. That's a highly political, I would say it's a highly ethical issue. What price you give to the future, 10 years from now, 15, 50, 100 years. That's an ethical, that's a value issue. And so you need to combine expertise and value.
Do you really think that's the debate that they're having in the White House, what social discount rate to use?
No, I don't think so.
Do you think that in Congress they have ever discussed that issue substantively and understanding what the social cost of carbon is? I tell you, they are not interested in the merest analytical process at all.
So Jeffrey
Because the
and
Koch
Jean-Marie,
brothers,
I hear you both. I
because
hear
the
the
Koch
mistakes.
brothers are the biggest
Jeffrey,
financiers of our
I
Congress.
hear you. There's a huge political thrust to your debate and your argument. I hear you. Anyone who lives in the States understands you. I'm also thinking about the global South. This conversation is very global North. I want to open it up. Good morning, sir. Stand up. Tell us who you are.
My name is S.P. Parmakar. I'm from the International Committee for Peace and Translation, associated in ECOSOC. My question is directed to Professor Sachs. It seems to me you are giving a very gloomy picture of the future of the USA, and you are attributing some of blames in leadership. My question is that the leadership came to power not by military coup, they came by democratically. So some of the philosophy of the present president were known to the people. Still they elected him knowingly. And in all probability it seems he may be elected again. Do you blame for one individual or blame the people who elect him? If you are worried about the future, you have to educate the people, not the few leaders.
Thank you. Thank you. Good question.
Sure, it's a complicated question. Trump won 27% of the vote. What does it prove? What does it mean? It means very little. And it certainly had almost nothing to do with the issues we're discussing, because the substantive positions of the American people in broad majority are not on Trump's side. So we have a massive set of failures, without question. We don't even know exactly why he got elected also. We're going to wait for Mueller's investigation for that as well. But he did not win the popular vote. Half the country did not vote. He got 27% of the vote, less than his opponent. And on all of the issues, he is taking decisions that have no legislative basis, no popular support, but he's taking them because that's what power is about.
Yes, sir, at the back.
Sure. Sorry. Thanks a lot. Matthew Lee, Inner City Press. I think I have two questions for Mr. Gaynor and Mr. Sachs, and it has to do with the UN itself and its relevance or even credibility. This has to do with issues that have been taking place at the UN for some time. For example, that of sexual abuse by peacekeepers, the inability to hold them accountable. This is something that, as a journalist, I get people all over the world write in and say, what's happening with the UN? The same thing would be true of the tolerated Haiti, the failure to recompense people, failure to have simple content-neutral media access rules, failure to even deal with sexual harassment in the UN system in a way better than corporate America or corporations elsewhere. So I guess I'm wondering what steps, your colleague from Portugal said that the Secretary General's reforms are not that daring. What steps are being taken by the UN itself to buttress its own credibility, to be able to say we do better than corporations or than non-democratic countries or even than what Mr. Sachs is talking about in Washington. There are issues on which the UN itself could improve in what's being done. Thank you very much.
I think that's a question for the PGA. Because you're in there. Come up here with the microphone. Sorry, move the microphone up here.
I'm not the panelist now. So
I know, but you're part of the conversation. What steps are being done right now, would you say? I'm intrigued.
if you speak about relevance of the United Nations,
Credibility.
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 There is all the goodwill on the side of the United Nations. The organization can go as far as the member states are willing to let it go. And our credibility is, of course, by good intentions. And the United Nations is dealing with a noble idea. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted by the General Assembly, and also lately the Sustainable Development Agenda, which is a transforming agenda for this planet, was adopted by the United Nations, by the General Assembly. So no one can suspect that there is not enough goodwill and credibility. But it's the member states to implement the decisions. So we need to ask what's the level of commitment, what's the level of honesty when it comes to deliver on what has been agreed here in the General Assembly.
Thank you. Let's reassign the microphone. So put your hand up if you wanted to ask a question, and let's get a microphone. Turn around. Just give somebody's got their hand up. There you go. Very good. Nick, I know you wanted to ask something. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to. Let me put a couple of thoughts in, and I'm really parachuting stuff in from our research here. But there's one wonderful phrase which Jeff Mulgan, who used to work at number 10 Downing Street, who now runs as the chief executive of NESTA, which is the National Endowment for Science, Technology and the Arts, really wise on this. He said, what is now happening with leadership is it's held back by zombie orthodoxies. Zombie orthodoxies, thinking the way it's been is the way it's going to be, and that's the way you need to adjust your mindset. That is out of touch now with the new reality. And secondly, again, to put it on the agenda, I'm going to quote Chris Donnelly here, who's the director of the Institute for Statecraft in London, who has it, in our view, exactly where it should be at the moment. The rate of change we're going through at the moment is comparable to what happens in wartime. We have change at war rates, yet we think we're at peace. The global pace of change is overcoming the capacity of national and international institutions. So for the time remaining this morning, overcoming the capacity of institutions. It's all very well getting stuck in the weeds in a kind of traditional conformist way. Overcoming the capacity to handle, particularly when it comes to so many clear new national agendas which are being faced at multinational level in the United Nations.
Can you stand up? Stand up here for the microphone. Great. Hello.
Hello, my name is Anna Sofia Brunash. So we talked about the crisis of politics, and in this crisis of politics we have a profound distrust of the public in the press. So my question is for Mr. Francisco Baldwin. As you have a major role in creating and developing free press in Portugal, so how do you think we can incarcerate the public and press? And by public, I mean, of course, not really the people presenting the news, but the people that are outreach now and that then end up believing, let's say, politicians. So how do you think we can, make them reconnect and make them believe again that the press is not lying to them? Thank you.
I understood you asked me how can we reconciliate the existence and the functions in which we believe that the media, the press, should function, and what's happening now. No?
How can we reconcile the press and make the press a believable actor?
Okay, credibility for the press. How do you make the press a believable actor?
Capable.
The press. Credibility of the press.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I believe that what's happening with the use of social media for fake news and well, we know of Cambridge Analytica and so whatever else. Probably if Cambridge Analytica did not exist, Brexit would not have happened. Maybe, I don't know if you can tell me. And maybe Trump would not have won the election. So it's as important in history as that. And the press, the media, have not been able to face that wave that is expanding, which people also are wanting to read things in which they want to believe, irrespectively of those things being, those facts being true. I think that it went to such a point, the pendulum went now to such a point, that many people are reckoning that they need true professional journalism, fulfilling the rules of journalism, being sanctioned in case they don't accomplish, they don't obey to those rules, and that will have a good and positive effect in separating what is rotten and not true to what is on principle acceptable and people should believe in and can believe in. If there is still time for that, because most of the serious media are now in trouble, as you know, it's not only newspapers, it's also televisions, it's also radios, and they are not also being able to compensate their losses on paper, on newsprint, and even on television, to compensate those losses with making more money in the digital information and communication, then we will be, I believe, endangered more and more by the possibility of fake news circulating with no possible control. I hope, however, that we will be able to find a way, and it's also, of course, important to underline that the media company must make money to be independent. If it doesn't make money, it will appeal to somebody, being it a group of private interests or the government or whatever, to pay for its existence, and then its independence is gone. I believe, I am suspicious here, you too, that more and more our role is becoming important and relevant, and I believe and hope that this role will be preserved.
As someone who worked in the media for a significant number of decades, I would say your framing is rather one-dimensional. There are a significant number of nations now who are determined to distort the media environment in ways where they're putting vast amounts of money into it. And I'm not going to go into details at the moment, it would take too long. But there is clear evidence that, quite apart from what happened in the American election 2 years ago, that there are other things at work here which are, and I'm astonished, I work for 2 traditional broadcasters in the United Kingdom. I'm amazed now that there are those in the United Kingdom who would prefer to get their news from somewhere else, including from state-backed platforms which are beaming via satellite, as opposed to believing, say, the BBC or ITN or Sky. That's a serious development. In other words, what do people want to consume as opposed to what they should consume? And much of the Brexit debate was based on distorted claims which no one really wanted to accept the challenges that were being made. That's why the environment is so different, whether you're in a place like the United Kingdom or in many developing countries as well. These are potentially for free mediated information are sinister times.
I think this is a very important point. The reason why we have the fake news issue is about power. It's not that the BBC suddenly became a dishonest source of news, or that the New York Times or others became a dishonest source of news. We have a pathologically lying president doing everything he can to undermine the media for a reason. We have Rupert Murdoch, absolutely destructive in the English-speaking world for very clear reasons. We have other outlets doing the same. This is part of a power struggle. It's not about, and we should understand it doesn't necessarily solve the problem, but demagogues have been able to create propaganda and tell big lies for as long as there has been mass media. And now they have more ways to do it. And so what we're experiencing here is an assault on freedom by Trump and what he represents and by other powerful interests. It's very dangerous. It doesn't give an answer how to combat it except to understand at first that it is not, it's an attempt to discredit professional journalism. And unfortunately, it has a lot of success because propaganda has a lot of success, not because of the failures of professional journalism.
Let me just get the last two questions. So stand up if you have a microphone, if you're holding the microphone. Is anyone else holding a microphone? Okay. Your question is?
I'm speaking on behalf of a Facebook viewer, Rafael Gonzalez Mareto. In the revision of the UN peace-building architecture, when the UN uses the term people-centered versus state-centered approaches, do you think that these terms are divisive? And do they dissociate the state from its citizens and vice versa? Thank you.
And the other question was?
Hi, my name is Shamina de Gonzaga. I'm with World Council of Peoples for the UN, and I served as an advisor to 3 PGAs on civil society in the illustrious capacity of the panel, of course, but on the day-to-day operational capacity. The moderator asked before about suggestions for doing things differently. So one thought I have as someone who was involved in organizing a lot of the meetings is that it occurs to me that these are to some extent a distraction for the member states, the administration, and the NGOs to have a very conference-centric system. A lot of resources, a lot of publicity goes into these moments, and not as much into implementation and monitoring of progress. The PGA himself made allusion to the SDGs and the 2030 agenda. There are many disparate efforts, but generally lacking in organization and resources. And if you look at the high-level political forum, the voluntary national reviews and their gap compared to real progress on the ground, I think that that's a huge area where real progress could be made, considering that there is some goodwill, as was also mentioned. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your suggestions. So very quickly, people-centered versus state-centered, and thank you Facebook for following and watching. Are those two phrases, one's better than the other? Are they conflicting with each other? Who wants to take that? Nick.
I don't actually. I need to think about that. I'm not sure I've got an answer yet.
Jean-Marie.
Well, I think that tension has existed since the creation of the UN. It says we the people, but it's an organization of states. And there are states who are concerned about their people, and states who are not that much concerned about their people. Now you see that state sovereignty is still a very powerful thing. To try to get a visa in some countries is not so easy. So the notion that states are just fading away is totally wrong. So you cannot ignore states, because states have the enforcement capacity. They have, at the end of the day, we live in a physical space. And so states are there to say. But I do agree that one needs to leverage the influence of people. And that there, the world today being much more connected, there's much greater potential for people to influence things. Now, the question of legitimacy, what is a legitimate NGO, what is in civil society, is a rather fuzzy concept that can be manipulated, and dictators know that. And so the people, especially in a world that is territorial but less territorial, how you organize them? You organize them on a territorial basis, on an issue basis. All these issues are before us, and I think that's where, in a way, what we've been discussing during this session, the future of multilateralism, is part of a bigger question, which is about the future of how societies are going to organize themselves. Multilateralism was born in a world of states, well-defined states with well-defined borders. That world hasn't disappeared. States are still very much alive and kicking, but at the same time, there are competitors, people are on the move, migrations, so people, money, goods, everything is on the move. How that world adapts to that, that's a question for states, that's a question for the United Nations.
So gentlemen, just to wrap up here, where does the UN fit in with other international, multilateral organizations? I'm going to ask you this in a sentence, if I may, which is a shocking thing to do, but I know you've been thinking about this for a year. So where does the UN fit with the IMF, the World Bank, the European Union? How does that work? Is it a partnership?
It is a family. The World Bank is part of the UN, and all the major international bodies are part of the UN, and that is how it should be. That there should be one locus of global, legitimate political authority under a single charter and under a universal declaration of human rights, and the repository of international law and global treaties. We can't do without this institution, and we had better make it work before things fall apart.
Jean-Marie?
Well, as I said, the UN is an organization of states, and states still matter a lot. And so when it comes to building legitimacy, as imperfect, flawed as the UN may be, you see that informal groups, think of the G20, they need the UN. You think, and when you see specialized entities like the World Bank, you see how when it comes to politics, they need the UN. So I think the UN is that place where you come for the imperfect legitimacy that a very imperfect international community can muster today. It's not a completely satisfactory response, because our world is what it is. It's not chaos, it's not hot, but it's certainly not the world of Kant. And the UN is in between, and it's a step in the right direction, but with many more steps that should be taken.
Obviously, it can't be summed up in a sentence, but Francisco, do try. The idea of the UN fitting in with other multilateral, international organizations. Where's the fit?
Where is the fix, you ask?
The fix.
Maybe the
How
fix
do
too.
they fit?
The fix.
Yes. It could be a fix too, but I'll leave that to you.
The objective is to reckon reality. There are many, many things that we can call multilateralism that are happening, and in which the United Nations don't practically touch. Let me give you a national example. We have the community of the Portuguese-speaking countries that goes from Portugal to East Timor. That is multilateralism, but it's not, does not fit obligatory inside the United Nations. Even the European Union has its own, or tries to have its own foreign policy, other intervention, and through a multilateral organization, and it doesn't function obligatory in agreement with the United Nations. There again, I say that the General Assembly will be the only meeting place where many things can be discussed and that can be very useful. But you cannot forget that multilateralism is going through different channels, different objectives, and that applies to ASEAN, it applies to whatever. If we forget that, as far as I understood, the problem of veto power at the national security, at the Security Council of the United Nations has not been mentioned once here until now. Is it possible to discuss the rule of law, multilateralism, without mentioning at least the rule of law inside the United Nations? Security Council? I leave the question.
The next panel is Stronger General Assembly for a Stronger United Nations. Look at what is happening now, particularly led by China, the challenge there is to this multinational system in the banking sector. It's already, we'll talk about the World Bank, but look at what's happening with AIIB, look at what's happening with so many other initiatives which are coming from the PRC and elsewhere, and others, India as well. So I don't think it can be taken for granted. I don't think it can be taken for granted. Particularly if one or two nations begin to withdraw significant levels of funding, which will act as a kind of a massive implosion at very short notice. One of the things we discussed was finance for development. How you have to go around begging for money for development. That is something which is going to become potentially existential. I don't want to be pessimistic, but I want to pick up finally on that word gloomy. I hope you don't go away feeling gloomy from this. This is about being realistic. And that's what good politics is about. It's what good corporate management is about. And you need to go away from this feeling, actually you can thrive on this. The problem I think is, and this is what we discussed at length several times, is most minds have yet to get to that point of realizing the enormity of change. But it's the speed at which it's happening. It's not pleasantly, comfortably incremental and prescriptive. It's happening beyond the ability to shape it. And let me just finally leave you with one thought about how significant this is, and it's coming from Joe Kaiser, who is the president and chief executive of Siemens. He, as a leading industrialist, not a politician, is saying the following, and has to make these judgments compared to what's happening to GE. He's gone public and said, if we get this right, nearly 10 billion people will benefit by the year 2050, but this is the most important point. To be saying this publicly is extraordinary. If we get it wrong, societies will be divided into winners and losers. Social unrest and anarchy will arise. The glue that holds societies and communities together will disintegrate, and citizens will no longer believe the governments are able to fulfill their purpose of enforcing the rule of law and providing security. So it's all very well having a national security advisor within member nations, but isn't it actually a national stability advisor? You may think I'm being gloomy, but this is actually now coming from those behind the scenes who are realizing that big things can change very quickly and in very ominous ways.
The next panel begins in 10 minutes. We have refreshments outside. It'll be a good time to decompress. One more thing for me to do before I hand over to your next moderator for the second half of the morning is to say, ladies and gentlemen, please thank your panel.